Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Hey, check it out. This is going to be a cool one. It's Friday. It's fun. Let's talk about T-Mac, Tom Mackie, who worked for Red6. Tom is a Marine pilot who flew F-18s during his career. And this is pretty cool because he's also a Top Gun grad. How many Top Gun grads do you see on other podcasts? Probably not that many. He works for a guy named Dan Robinson. Dan is a British guy who is the first, I believe, person not born in the U.S. to be an F-22 Raptor pilot. So he came here and he stood out. I mean, you don't get picked for these jobs. Like amongst the fighter pilots, then there's the next level up, and then there's the guys they pick for these very, very special things like Top Gun, like F-22 pilot. Top of the pyramid in terms of their ability to perform. So Scott Huesing and I got with Tom, and we started talking about their new project at Red6. And what they do is, and this is for all you tech people and all you founders out there and all you serial entrepreneurs, check out what these guys are doing. They put a visor on in the cockpit, and the pilot can see through the visor, but they have like a heads-up display of sorts. And it has virtual opponents or virtual obstacles that you're flying through, or a virtual tanker plane, so that the first time you go to fly and actually go airplane to airplane to fuel up, which is an extremely dangerous thing to do, you've already got maybe 1,000 missions because you're in the airplane, in the air, doing augmented reality. I hope I'm explaining this well. Imagine this. If you have two pilots in the air, one is always being the chased, one is always being the chaser. Now these guys are saying, why don't we put a virtual rabbit up there and you can go engage with that, and our pilots can actually practice on the thing they're supposed to practice at, and that's going after the rabbit. And of course the AI makes the rabbit faster and harder to catch, and so you really can take time to while you're flying. So think of a simulator. You don't feel the G-forces. You don't have to move your head around. You kind of just sit still. This is in the airplane flying through the air. And also think about this: two airplanes in the air dogfighting each other. They're both always being destroyed because these things are like race cars in the sky, and they break. And so obviously when they break, people die, but also it costs billions of dollars to fix these things. So these guys are saying, hey, let's put virtual opponents in the air, and for as much as possible, develop capacity without having to be as expensive in terms of lives and materiel. Okay, listen, that's the show. That's it. That's great. Share the show. Top Gun pilot, are you kidding me? You better share this show. And also Save the Brave. SaveTheBrave.org. You know what to do. All right, everybody. Here comes Tom Mackie, a.k.a. T-Mac.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is T-Mac, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
I am stoked to have this show with you, but I'm going to shut up because this is Scott's production, so I'm going to get out of his way.
Well, what's interesting, too, is, first, thanks for having us up here. We're in Santa Monica.
Yes.
That's where we're dropping this pod from. We flew in the Bearcoot today. We pulled some G's. What did I get?
6.5, brother.
6.5 G's. We were in flight suits. We all wore flight suits because we're flying. And we're all veterans. T-Mac's a Marine. But this is not a military show. We have a lot of veterans on the show. But we're going to talk to the audience today, and really we're going to hand it over to T-Mac and talk about his company, Red6 Aerospace, and the ATAR technology that they're developing not only for commercial applications, but military crossover primarily to help better train our military. And I mean, it's already not even 2 o'clock, and we got up here. My 405 induced Tourette syndrome as I'm dropping F-bombs along the 105, and finally get up here, I'm just stressed out. But then to fly and go up and see the coast and over Point Doom is just gorgeous. But tell everybody how you got into this. I mean, when you had a whole career as an F-18 driver. Just talk us through that, and then what led you to this point here.
Sure. So the sort of speed read of it is I was a kid from Chicago that was fortunate enough to go into the Marine Corps. Went through pilot training in Pensacola, jets out of Beeville. I was lucky to get selected for F-18s out of there. My first duty station was in El Toro. I spent 3 deployments and about 4 years there. I was super fortunate to go to Top Gun. I was the last class out of Miramar before they moved to Fallon. Came back, and at that point, the deployment cycle was pretty crazy, and so I
Did you just say you're an F-18 fighter pilot Top Gun graduate?
I am.
I'm adding that to the show bio.
Yeah.
We also have had badass.
He's
Top
like
Gun.
it's like a trifecta. I mean,
yeah. I mean, before we blow past all that, that's a serious accomplishment, man.
Thanks. Every once in a while, guys slip through the cracks, right?
Yeah.
I will tell
I'm
you
not
that.
saying I was good at it.
I'll tell you, it's nothing like the movie. We weren't singing at the club every night and playing volleyball. It was,
Right.
sort of graduate level work.
And getting chicks was hard, right?
Oh yeah, that is definitely a tragic difficulty. I will say that if you look back and kind of segue back to Top Gun, the idea is to teach the teachers. So think of it as a grad level course. So my fortunate part was to go and learn just from some of the best guys. There was a Air Force guy on staff and a bunch of Navy guys, obviously, and then Marines. So I basically take that knowledge back to my squadron and try to teach all the young guys the same things I had done, and we pass along. And very much like MOTS for the Marine Corps being the epitome of the weapons school, it's the Navy side. So in the Marine Corps squadrons, we try to send guys to both entities of training, Top Gun and MOTS, to try to improve that instructor corps. So I had left active duty, and I was fortunate to fly with the reserves out of Miramar. And at the time, airlines were big hiring, kind of like they're doing now, which we'll kind of talk about to where the airline shortages are and pilot shortages in the services due to the airline hiring. So I did that for a few years and was having a good time and thought, this is good living. I'm flying F-18s part-time. I'm flying with the airlines part-time. Not working too hard at either. And then, obviously 9/11 hits, and so it wasn't too fun to be at the airlines at that point. And all the airlines, United, Delta, American, everyone, they were just dying to get people off the property. So I had just enough engineering to be dangerous. So I went and worked at the X-47 program for Northrop Grumman, which ended up being the first unmanned aircraft to land on the aircraft carrier.
Underachiever, Scott.
And another underachiever.
Yeah. Well, it's great. As you guys know, hey, the Marines. I'm like, hey, we're trainable. So just put us into something. And I'm of the mindset, like most Marines, I think if I don't understand something, I'll try to be voracious and trying to learn about it and do the best I can to the best of my ability. And I had a great team. Northrop was really stacked with some great folks then, and there's a lot of airline guys that were military, ground, air, enlisted officer, general officers, just really neat. So working on an innovation program was really exciting. And as a military guy, being on the inside, watching the acquisition side, I'd like to think I understood it more, but it still seemed very archaic and still broken in how long it takes to procure things. So I spent a bunch of years there, and just as the Marine Corps' F-18 reserve units were basically decreasing because it was just the airplane was getting older and hard to keep them flying. Very quickly, 4 squadrons became 1, so I ended up going to Fort Worth, Texas, and flying with the reserve unit there, the VMFA 112 Cowboys. Great group. And I flew there, went to Iraq in 2009. I stayed there, and I was there again for deployment in 2013. And along the way, I made a bit of a pit stop. I had known the Oakley guys all the way through my career, just having done a bunch of sports and things. The guy that started the standard issue line of Oakley that's geared towards the military was a good friend of mine. So we always maintained a good relationship. I never actually worked there, but we just collaborated on ideas and gear and getting that out to the troops. Well, as it turns out, the guy that started Oakley, a guy named Jim Gennard, sold it off to Luxottica, I think back in 2007 for $2.1 billion.
Jesus.
So had it been the three of us, we'd be talking from this podcast in Fiji on some boat, and maybe once every 3 or 4 months, just, checking in. But this guy, just an incredible visionary.
Yeah.
He decided that he would get into the film industry, and he was a big camera buff. And he decided that he would be the first one to really crack the ultra-high-def 4K technology, which they did. So they started getting that into the movie realm. So I was fortunate to come on, work in business development, and they were trying to stimulate sales outside of the cinema to military. So I was given a pretty much blank canvas and given the opportunity to go grow the market. So I went to military, government, sports, but in particular I was at like Raytheon, let's say, for their ISR and the capabilities to bring ultra-high-def technology to the warfighter. It was really ahead of its time because back then I would tell some of the folks that, hey, these 4K panels will be in Walmart here in a couple of years for like, $700 or $800. Well, it took a lot longer than that, and the first ones that came out were about $25,000. So I would talk to folks and be like, hey, T-Mac, I love you, brother, but $25,000 for a TV is a little steep. I'm thinking maybe pay off a credit card, buy a car, down payment on a house, or TV. Yeah. So.
Unless you own Oakley.
Yeah, right. Unless
and you've got one in the bathroom.
Right, unless they're everywhere. And but it was really fun to work there because the speed at which they were able to do things was great. And that's, I think, a segue into kind of how I ended up at Red 6, and it was through a connection that Red had Red Digital Cinema had with Nick Bitchnich, who's our CTO, is how I kind of came into the company and then got introduced to Dan and the gang. So I guess internally I joke that I think I can only work some of the starts with the Red, having been Red Digital Cinema, now Red6. But as you guys have seen, meeting Dan and Glenn and Nick, it's just an incredible team, and their story in itself. I would advocate for folks to go to Dan's LinkedIn page, Daniel Robinson, as well as look at our website and see the histories you guys.
Just sitting down. I mean, we were talking about the technology and what you're doing here is one thing, but when we sat down just outside the office here, hearing Dan's personal story of not only, I mean, he did everything, and that conversation went from cats on skateboards from DARPA to his saga going from the UK and being the first F-22 Raptor driver to going back, picking up his dad's construction business and personal traumas, and then just really finding his way through life and what makes him happy in that balance. And then what was cool about that, and we could do a whole show on Dan because it does sound like, there's more layers to that, but what that brings to your team, I think, is that not only just the military camaraderie that we all enjoy, but people that are in it for the right reasons. Right. Why are you guys doing this now?
Sure. No, and I think that's a great question. Like I said, Dan's personal saga and journey, if you will, that led him to essentially establish Red6 was ultimately developed by the fact that he had been a Raptor pilot, and he was noodling over the conundrum of adversary air not being properly available to train with. So it was at that point in time he had been thinking about it, and then as you alluded to, he had some family issues that caused him to go back to England and restructure the company that was left to him and then get that back. So when he came back to the States, he was still, he's a warfighter at heart, and training is something that's of the utmost importance to all of us, whether doesn't matter what service you are, whether you're air or ground. As you guys know, we joke there's tremendous inter-service rivalry between ourselves, the air and the ground side of the house. But the fun part of it is, hey, you pick on one of us, you get all of us, right? Yeah. And ultimately, Dan went out on this thesis thinking that, listen, we can solve an adversary air problem, or I need to solve the adversary air problem. And it was very fortuitous that he met the other two founders. I'm not a founder of the company. I came in afterwards. And it was through Glenn Snyder, who developed the tech that you guys met today, that virtual race car program, if you will, that he made. So real race car, real race car driver in the UK, real race car in the US. They met each other in a virtual world, and they they drove against each other. So when Dan saw that, he's like, well, wow, that's really interesting. So let's see, could we do that in airplanes? And they both looked and said, yeah, we think that's possible. But then reality is, like, no one's going to lie to fly VR, in airplanes. So then the question is, what can you do in AR, augmented reality? And that question was a defiant no, because it's not possible. And Dan, as you heard him say the sort of, fighter pilot mindset, and like little kid, why? And ultimately it became the reason that you can't do dynamic environment, augmented reality outdoors in dynamic environments. So after asking the why question several times, they broke down the formula, and they said, well, we know certain pieces here, we know certain pieces here, so let's try to work a solution. So through Glenn and Nick, they came up with this thesis on how this technology would work, and the initial drive was to solve the adversary air problem. And to kind of segue down there, I appreciate that the services are more vocal about the problems they're having. I think years ago we would kind of keep it close hold, and we didn't want our other nations and threat countries to realize that we've got some gaps. But if you watch the TV or social media, you can kind of figure it out. So the Air Force is woefully short of pilots, about 2,000. The Navy and Marine Corps scaled about the same. So that problem is something that's big. But then the other problem is, how do we train? And that's ultimately the core of, I think, what Dan was getting at. Being an F-22 pilot and having the highest clearances in the land for that particular airplane, and seeing the training problems of fifth-generation aircraft poses versus fourth-generation, the F-15s, F-16s, F-18s. It's a whole different set when you start talking F-22.
Let's slow down right there, because you're talking about a lot of different things, and I want to kind of get the audience to get some of that richness that's in your head out. So when you say fourth generation versus fifth generation, talk a little bit about that. And then the adversarial training problem. Let's really understand what that is, because you say it, I understand what you're saying, but what does it mean to have that problem? What is the problem we're trying to solve?
So I say fourth generation, meaning F-18, F-16, F-15, and back then it's more of a sensor and fusion problem in how we share data and collect data in the systems we have, and include stealth. So those airplanes back in the day were great for what they were doing. But as you heard Dan say earlier, the reemergence of Russia onto the world stage, the pace of innovation coming from China, our near-peer threats now is what caused us to really have to build an F-22 and F-35 in the first place to continue to have that dominance, which we don't really enjoy that anymore. I remember seeing a special back in the day when they were talking about the build of the F-22. They said that the F-15 was built for air superiority, but the F-22 was built for air dominance. And we enjoyed dominance for a long time, but now that a J-20 from China or a PAC-FA out of Russia's onto the stage, it changes the landscape of the game and how do you train. So traditionally, the way we had trained was, me as an F-18 guy, I would take 4 F-18s in my squadron and pretend that we were enemies, bad guys, threats, MiG-29s, Su-27s, and we'd pretend that we were these, simulate the bad guys against the good guys. But you have 3 critical problems there. First, if I'm training to be a bad guy, I'm missing out being a good guy. And then the second one is I'm not getting the good training I would get as a fighter pilot because I'm trying to be a bandit. And then the third most critical one is we're burning through our assets really hard. And ultimately, I think that was the demise of why we've had such problems of maintainability and maintenance in all of our platforms, not just the jets.
When you say burn through assets, just so everyone listening knows, is like this means we're breaking planes faster than we can fix them, buy parts, and our people. Because you look at the second and third order fix, not just some sexy pilot wearing all the cool gear flying at Mach, but there's an 18, 19-year-old kid that's turning wrenches on these planes. And you know what? He's not living the dream his recruiter fucking sold him. He's working 18 hours a day. Yeah. He's getting no glory. There's no parades. He's wearing hydro-covered coveralls. And he's not getting check rides either out of the deal. He's just busting his ass. So when we talk about burning through assets, we typically think consumables, but it's also people. And that's the strength of our force in our nation. And back to Pete's question, how does it affect us?
Sure. Well, I think that's a great point you put up, and I'll tell you that having worked in the garage and the squadron, I'll tell you, the best maintainers, I've been fortunate to be involved with the best maintainers, maintaining an F-18 that, I jokingly say if you walk around, sometimes the Air Force planes, it's all pretty and pristine and good to go. And if I do a pre-flight on a Hornet and I'm not covered in, hide, oil, and fuel, it's probably out. Yeah. So our guys are just doing a fantastic work, but so do the plane captains, Air Force and Navy. And it really is due to those plane captains that I'm even allowed to be flying and have this job. And they tell me the plane's good to go and phenomenal. However, you're right. Typically, the Marine Corps motto for the maintainers is day crew is stay crew. Yeah. They're there all stinking day and night. And it's tough because think of like just your social aspect. If they're there from sun up to sundown, trying to go home, have some time with the family or girlfriend or get a workout in and get ready for the next day, you're just exhausted. And you do this over and over again. And we really, again, burn through those assets. And when we think of assets, it's not just the airplanes. The people are the most important part of that. So the supply chain that goes behind one sortie, whether it be a helicopter, a jet, even in planning on the infantry side, when you're going through all the different pre-deployment trainings and all the cycles you have, man, we just burn our people out. No. So it's a combination of problems.
The other thing too is as we've graduated generations of aircrafts, like you can look at a F-4 Phantom and go, that's a pretty modern airplane, but in reality, it's 50 plus years old, right? And so when you have when you look at where we are now with all the technology, like there's a flying network in the air. These planes are talking to one another.
Oh yeah,
and not just the pilots, but the planes are like beep beep, beep back and forth. So when this is like a Formula One race car up in the air, flying in combat situations. And like Scott's saying, when you use that resource, like my race car's a shitty Supra, it's always in some state of broken and it needs repair. We still race it, but that's the same thing with these things is the amount of money, not only like those service members, but the contract companies are like the only ones that know how to fix this one aspect. And you're always refitting and all. I mean, a Phantom, you can put fuel in it, some oil in it, and go fly it, and then come back and be like, let's go fly again. Right. I'm minimizing the amount of work, but how much more complex and how much more maintenance is there on a 22 or a 35? I mean,
to answer your question, phenomenal is probably the right word. Only because, back in the days when we didn't have to worry much about stealth and we didn't have as many of the radar systems and the fusion and technology that we have in data links that are all, part of our world today, that's, sort of iPhone-ish
Right.
in the airplane. So not only do we have to worry about the sort of mechanical corrosion, hydraulic, just the maintainability of the physical asset, a whole nother world, the avionics and the weaponry and the missiles and the radar and the folks that run that is a massive effort, and it takes super technical guys to be able to do, just the maintenance on those airplanes. And like I said, we fly them rough every day. So when we come back, we call them gripes. If we got gripes on the airplanes, they've got to come in and fix them off. And so now when you talk about LO, low observable or stealth technology, like an F-22 or an F-35, maintaining that is it's got its own shop as well. So I would argue that back in the Phantom days to now, the cost of maintaining a fifth-gen airplane.
Well, I love this conversation because I think a lot of people don't, and it all goes back to that human capital, because now you're talking about advanced systems that are flying around the networks, and then you think back to the training pipeline for that young kid who's not even a pilot, he's not even an officer, but he needs that specialized training to fix those systems, the avionics, the computers, the coding, the programming, the cryptographic gears so we can talk secure comms in the air to the ground. So it's a super complex system, and we're continuing to get more complex. So we're adding rocks to our pack, as we say.
Right.
And it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And if you train for everything, you're not training for anything.
Right. Sure.
It just becomes task saturation at every level. Ground, air, doesn't matter. Civilian, corporate, the same thing applies, and you can't be great at that. So we went up flying with you today, and just I'll give the grunt version of what I saw is, and TK introduced us and says, "Hey, Scotty, you got to go meet T-Mac. He's going to take you flying, and you go to Santa Monica, and he's got to show you this new tech." And I was like, "All right, cool, man. It doesn't take much to sell me to go fly around and pull some G's." It was awesome. But what was being shown to me through the ATARs was you put the helmet on, we strap in, they plug us in like umbilical cords inside this sexy little plane that goes about 300 plus miles an hour. And then Glenn, you got to tell us about Glenn's background too here shortly, so people understand where this cat comes from, because he's a mind blower. Plugs us in, visors down, sexied up, and then there's an enemy in front of me, a real plane that we go to refuel at, or we track. As you're flying, you've got all the physical problems that you do in the cockpit, the G-forces, or not crashing into another plane, by the way, while you're in the sky, or staying in formation. All these things are overwhelming. And I'm thinking to myself, all I'm doing is fixating on this target. And that was a real problem for me as I'm in the backseat of this plane. Yeah. And thinking of all the things that the pilot has to do in the hours of training. So that's what I'm seeing through. I don't know, what's the best way you describe it to people?
I'd say it's just initially it's an early version of a visor system. Think of them as large sunglasses to some degree right now, where we've got some clever technology built into an H-255 helmet, which is basically the standard fighter helmet you see in the movies and that the folks are using. So our initial prototype is a combiner glass, and then we put a visor over the top of it, much like a regular fighter visor, like you said, keeping it sexy and being able to see the technology. Our end game will just ultimately be a visor with a curved holographic display, so it's just to pop on, and you basically, as Dan would say, it's the gateway to your augmented world. So as we know in defense, you would need to be able to be agnostic and plug and play if you want anything to really work. So that's how we're scaling the technology, to be agnostic. So that what you saw today, fellas, when we were flying is an early version, but ultimately that technology is going to get better and better. It already has a 105 degree field of view. As you guys can see today, it's bright. We pulled up to the tanker and we maneuvered back to
There's
the pre-contact.
texture in the images. I mean, the work that Glenn's done
it's incredible.
Is, I mean, when you're this, by the way, the plane that you're tracking or fighting in or refueling, it doesn't exist. It's all virtual. But you're looking at it. I'm literally looking out at the side of the cockpit, and I see this plane, and you can see the camouflage and the rivets on the plane practically. There's that much detail.
It's crazy.
It is. It really is mind-blowing. And the first thing I'm thinking is, like, surely this can't be the first time anyone's thought of this.
And just so we're clear, we're in the air flying over Malibu.
We're 4,000 feet over Malibu,
And so we're flying along at a couple hundred miles an hour. You see a refueling plane or an enemy. And in this case, and it blew my mind. You guys kept saying, we had to, make a cube show up. And I thought maybe you were even saying cube. I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? And then I saw the cube, and it still didn't make any sense to me because I'm like, well, there's a cube over there. I don't know.
What do you do with the cube?
Yeah, and then you're like, we're going to fly
the
through
sky.
the cube.
Yeah.
Right. And no shit. This cube, just so everybody knows, does not actually exist in the real world. It's augmented reality.
Right, it's 500 feet by 500 feet with a wire frame and a three-dimensional deep, so you can actually fly above it, through it.
Right.
And it feels, as you guys saw, the texture of flying through it.
Yeah.
It feels real.
And if you don't know what augmented reality is, here's the best way to think about it. If you watch a football game and they show you the first down marker or how many yards to go, that's augmented reality. So you're looking at something like that, but now it's this 500 by 500 cube in the air that you literally fly your plane through. And I'm like, a dog chasing a tennis ball. I'm like, what? They're flying through the cube. And I'm looking all around the cockpit trying to figure out what the hell is that? Because I had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind that you have this obstacle in the middle of the air that you can say, go fly through that. And so now we're going to take this, and like Scott said, you're going to put a tanker, you're going to put a whatever kind of bad airplane in the air, and go have combat and have it be a lot safer because you aren't wrecking two planes constantly and all these other things.
Well, we're talking about technology. I'm going to hand it over to T-Mac here, but first, talk a little bit about Glenn. Has a very unique background, not military, not an aviator, and he's putting this technology together. But we talked before we even went up about this technology being relevant, and we always like to use the iPhone example. Is we've got the iPhone 11 out. This thing's been out for 13, 14 years, basically. I think 06. Is when it hit the street. And we've already had 11 upgrades. The military does not work that fast. Government does not work that fast.
Right.
So you've got this shit-hot cadre of guys who are understanding that no matter how good your tech is, it has to be relevant and it has to be modernized and updated. And talk about Glenn and where you pulled this guy out, because
I can't. So like I said, so Dan and Robinson and Glenn Snyder and Nick Bitchenish are the founders of the company, and it was they all lived in the same area, and it was through Dan initially seeing Glenn had worked on that virtual drift where I talked about the race cars, and that's where that conversation got struck up. So I came on several months later when the airplane was just still being built, and that's a story in of itself, as you guys know.
Yeah.
But as far as Glenn's concerned, when I first met him, I thought, man, this guy's like wicked smart. And then as I started to listen to what he's doing, and then I came onto the company and I looked and I'm like, okay, so peel the onion a little bit. He went to Savannah College of Art and Design, which is essentially the Top Gun of graphics and art design schools. And so I didn't know this existed, but he told me that every quarter, you heard him say this in the hangar recently. He says, oh yeah, every quarter they give you like, posting of progress grades and 10% you're making the cut. That's like Jack Welch at, GE back in the day. And I'm thinking, thank God my college didn't have a progress report, T-Mac wouldn't be sitting here today, I'm like, so that alone, I was like, wow, your college is getting graded to that level. It's pretty intense. But from what I understand, the guys that come out of there really are the rock stars. So his first job, actually, I believe out of college, he was working on Star Wars and Transformers, doing some really, really cool stuff. Can you imagine, the level of money and effort that they put into a Star Wars movie and the cadre of people to get the exact effects they get. Now, Glenn would say, oh, after a while it got kind of mundane doing this and that. And, anybody that's a Star Wars fan or of that kind of tech, I'm like...
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Now, Glenn would say, oh, after a while it got kind of mundane doing this and that. And, anybody that's a Star Wars fan or of that kind of tech, I'm like, that's just mind-blowing to me that you can do that. So when we transitioned into going into the airplane route, I was watching Glenn's computer displays and how he was starting to write the code and doing these things. And I thought, well, that just assuages any doubt that I have that I may eventually be a coder. But I couldn't help but thinking like, boy, this guy's missing his calling for like, being in a Hollywood movie or hacking the CA database. But he'd already done that.
He'd already done it.
When I see these movies of all these, I think sometimes you get... maybe oblivious to the fact that, oh, there's a movie with a guy hacking into some, Mission Impossible or whatever the movie might be. But those are the Glenns of the world that can actually do that shit. It's crazy.
Yeah, and to hear him just talk about the reasons he's doing it as well as I think, I don't want to quote him, but he became part of this team too, was not for the gobs of money and he knew it was going to be a struggle, but he wanted to do something of importance. And I think that whether the primary goal is to have this technology be adaptable into the military and make us a stronger country. I think there's money to be made in that, absolutely, and you should make a lot of money, because I think that's a priority when we're talking about securing our national interests and providing national security, so we can enjoy all of the creature comforts like movies and all the other stuff we take for granted as Americans, as consumers. But to have a kid who's 32 years old, who's got 12 years already under his belt in the VR AG world in Hollywood, and the opportunities he probably could have sought out on his own.
No doubt.
He's committed to this, and I could hear it in his voice, and I could see it in his face.
He is, and it's. I'll tell you, Dan is created a very good military culture, as you guys know, coming from the services, Army and Marine Corps, and how we see that small team, well-oiled machine working together. That's the culture that I think Dan has created within the team, and obviously coming from the Marine Corps, that's something, and you guys in the Army and Marines as well, we were all exposed to that. Yeah. So we've got, civilian guys on our team like Glenn and Nick, and they've adopted that mentality. But one of the really interesting things that I love about Glenn is he's a problem solver, and he just is like, he won't rest until he can figure it out. And quite honestly, when you look at companies like Magic Leap and others that have spent, $1 billion into the commercial system to try to figure out how to sell AR to the consumer, hasn't really done well. Mm-hmm. So when we start talking to investors or other folks about, well, hey, how did your little company, with not that much money and small, solve something that, companies that have 9 zeros attached to them haven't? And, it's ultimately, guys like Nick and Glenn that looked at it from a different problem. And then, of course, you have Dan's leadership kind of fostering this whole thing together. And while each member of the team, Dan would say it's all about, team and self combined, working together, we ultimately, everyone's got their own speciality of what they do, which is, very much like a infantry unit or like an aviation unit. And then, but we all have overlapping skills, and then we all bring that together. So in Glenn's case, when we're having problems with some of the tech, he just won't stop till he gets it. And what you guys saw today is essentially a product of, it's sort of, I should say, 2.5-ish of where the helmet tech is. But as far as being able to whip out the technology, it's amazing. In Camarillo and Malibu area where we are flying the tech, we were fortunate, as we mentioned, we were doing an Air Force demo for a bunch of the folks out of WEPTEC and Nellis. And so as part of that plan, we had to relocate the technology circuit, if you will, from the cube to the tanker to the fighter out to Boulder Cities where we flew at. So one of the first things I did as the business development guy, and Dan as the CEO, we got the approvals from the Air Force and airworthiness to get out there. And so we told Glenn, we're like, hey, we need to put this over here. So that was maybe like on a Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So like Thursday, I get a map of the area, and he says, yeah, I got the cube and the whole thing built like down in Boulder City. What altitude do you want? What do you want this? You want this? Hey, should we move this here, move this there? And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's awesome.
And again, we have to explain this because it's just remarkable. So there's a cube in the air above Malibu that we flew through, and I saw and it blew my mind. And now you got like, boop, you made one show up in Boulder City over there. And like, just the fact, is it always there?
No. So, excuse me. It's built.
Right.
So let me go back to where the cube came from. We call that a START, the static augmented reality target. When we first did the ground demonstration of this technology, and the thesis was that we could prove it in the air, like anything, you want to prove it on the ground first and do this sort of military defense crawl, walk, run, building block phased approach. So when we initially were doing this on the ground, we had demonstrations where we took off. We had like a 2-ship of F-22s. You go hit the tanker. So very mission oriented. Come off the tanker, go intercept bandits, shoot one BVR, beyond visual range. One of those bandits would get through, make it to what we'd call the merge in the WVR visual range, and we'd shoot him and press on. So we did this to an audience that was fantastic. Air Force driven, AFRL, Air Force Research Lab, Air Education Training Command, Test Pilot School, Air Combat Command, Training and Readiness Squadron, all these very influential folks. And they're like, hey, that's all fine and good. You can prove it on the ground. So the real test is airborne. Yeah. So we, built this and started doing our demos in the fall in the sky. So they said, well, we want you to build something that's representative where we can actually see the qualitative results. So what was developed and designed and approved was a cube in the sky. So we built this 500-foot by 500-foot framed wired cube in white color so you could fly in and around it, look at target aspect observation, latency, brightness, occlusion, all those things. And Dan said, hey, this is all great. But for guys like us that are operators, we're like, hey, well, where's the real value outside of test pilot folks or test community looking at, hey, you did this is great. So we're a company that likes to, over deliver and under promise,
Right.
which is usually the opposite of what we see out of most of the vendors out there and just company habits these days. So we went a step further by building the tanker. So Glenn was able to 3D replicate the KC-46 tanker, the new Air Force tanker, and boom, we put the F-22 on the wing, as you guys saw. So we did that for a bit, and we were successfully able to maneuver to rendezvous, pre-contact, contact, come off, and as you saw today, we barrel rolled around the fighter and the tanker, which real world would cause me probably to be down for a couple of days for some counseling after doing that. But it was great to see because you can see that the airplane and the tanker track is spot on as if it would be real time.
So you've done aerial fueling.
Yes.
I mean, how close is that? Is it A plus, B minus?
Oh, I would say right now it's at the A level.
Yeah.
The only thing that is different is that the graphics will get better.
Right.
So as we pulled in there, you can see, I mean, there it is in your face. It's a 767 essentially tanker. So when we rendezvous and pull up, I mean, it's there you are. You're behind a big, massive commercial airplane, as you guys saw.
Yeah.
And the boom itself, you saw the green zones that put us in the base in the back of your
see
nugget.
it's like
It's there.
fuel hose coming at you.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So what will get better is the brightness, the latency, and the actual texture of that will be eventually, you won't be able to tell.
As a guy that had to do this for the first time, actually doing it for the first time.
I was terrified. It was awful.
Talk about that, though. Tell us what that's like. I mean,
Sure.
Whether it's landing on an aircraft, whatever those things are, these are one-time things, but you're no shit, in the air doing them.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you think about it. If you, I would encourage your listeners just to Google air-to-air refueling. Any service, doesn't matter, whether it be helicopters or jets or Army, Navy, Marine Corps. It's one of the things we talk about, and this is very typical of all services. A lot of times, the first time you do something is the first time you do something.
Yeah.
So this is one of those evolutions you would like to not have to be that case. So the first time you see a tanker as a pilot is usually the first time you see the tanker. And if you guys remember last December, there was that accident off at Uakuni. That was actually my first squadron back in the day where the F-18 hit the C-130. And over in Japan there, all the C-130 crew was lost. And I believe the backseater had lived through, but essentially, killed many people and both of the assets. And it was night training evolution. So it goes to show that tanking is very a contentious situation.
It is a gas station in the sky.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, and ultimately, we're up there in race cars that don't have a lot of gas.
Right.
So that's how we extend our mission longevity and time on station by refueling. And in the Marine Corps and Navy, we do it different because we do the probe and drogue, which is a little bit different than the boom you guys saw today. So what happens is, like I said, if you see videos of C-130s, which is very typical for the Marine Corps, their basket will come out and we have a probe that comes out. It's like a little metal arm that's a few feet long. And essentially what you do is you get a couple inches away from it, and once you get stabilized, assuming that all the things to get there, rendezvous and whatnot, and the airplane up and down, and the hose under good conditions, it'll be relatively stable, but it can be fluctuating up and down. So you try to basically jam that thing in there and hold it. So once you actually get to that point, you're like, success. Well, not really, because you have to, I'd say that's the only time my brain synapses are probably firing on all cylinders at that point, because as the airplane gets heavier, which you're taking on fuel, you have to modulate the throttle, and then the airplanes that are tanking on eventually have to go into a racetrack pattern. So they're not only flying straight, they're in a turn. So you're having to maneuver the airplane around. And usually there's 2 or 4 of us there.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of following the one guy in the basket. Or in a C-130, there's usually 2 baskets. So one guy's flying formation while the other guy's in the tanker. They come off. The whole evolution is just, and we do this day in and day out of all the services.
It's so stressful.
It's crazy.
I mean, the only thing I could think of people that would never have the opportunity to fly would be imagine driving on a road, and I'm not advocating anyone to do this, create an accident, but try to hand a pencil from the driver's window over to the car driving next to you and see if you can hit that. It's probably pretty difficult at a high rate of speed.
Yeah.
Now you're flying several hundred miles per hour, maneuvering winds. It's just, the task saturation is nuts. But with your technology, you're doing it. And you're doing it in probably one of the most realistic ways. Anyone that's ever played Ace Combat or something on PlayStation where it's a video game, that's great. The graphics are great. The how you control the whatever joystick you're using is pretty spot on. Having flown in fighter aircraft, it's pretty realistic.
It is.
But there's one big factor missing.
Yeah, it's pretend. I mean, it's virtual. You're sitting in your couch and you've got your
There's no
fuzzy slippers
G-forces.
on, and
there's no
you don't have the
turbulence.
cognitive
There's no
load.
sweat. There's no
You're not sweating that you're going to, get shot at in a Call of Duty, or you're going to, regenerate,
Yeah, that reality, like you do a race car simulator and you go to Laguna Seca, you just go around turn 6. You don't realize that turn 6 there's a bucket there.
Right.
You want to get your car in it, it'll sit, but as it sits, it's going to slide across, and you're just going to smell rubber and go, got away with it.
Oh, sure.
And then go barreling up the hill. But you have to actually deal with the fear, the G-force. What the wind condition, all that stuff really happens.
Oh, sure. So many factors. Like today's a great example with you guys.
Yeah.
The weather was pretty decent. It was a little bumpy coming over the mountains, but we were up near Camarillo, near Point Magoo, so we're listening to Point Magoo approach. You heard them giving us traffic calls. We were out there, and as we were getting to join on the Adversary, which is the PAC FA today, as you saw, and it was great. I put into the shoot list so you could see that on our radar display, and in some cases it was 90 to 100 degrees off, and so we pulled a nice 5 to 6 Gs with you guys and rotated through there. And once we got there, I did this with both you guys. Once we were about 90 degrees off, I basically pulled a barrel roll to get behind the Bandit and show what kind of maneuver would be to get in there. And that's just something you're not ever going to get out of a simulator, pulling those G forces, the blood flowing, and also the weather, the fuel, all these things you have to manage. The simulators are absolutely fantastic for what they do, and I think the repetitive nature of the procedures and some of the TTPs, tactics, procedures that we do to get us to the point where we're going to do it in an airplane or do it in an infantry unit or do any kind of operational thing, jumping out of airplanes and those kinds of things. Yeah. The sims are great, but I don't ever see a situation where you're not going to replace that with doing the real thing. So even our augmented reality, as great as it is, it's still designed to be flown, in this case, or done while you're outside and moving, whether that be maybe active shooter environment. We talked about the applications to get down there later on, or house to house for the infantry side of the house and special ops. Yeah, it's as you guys saw, every time I fly it, and I've been flying it, not as much as Dan, but I probably have 50 flights or so underneath it now, and every time I go up, it's a thrill to see your guys' reactions too, because I've seen it enough where I'm still amazed by it, but when you guys see it for the first time, it really gets the creative juices going as to what's possible and where we're going. And as I sit here and hold my iPhone, one of the really cool things that our CTO Nick talks about is he says, we're all used to looking down, and you guys have seen this. We're walking in a airport or mall or something. We're about to get run over by the guy looking at his phone down, which might be me sometimes. Yeah. And, we're also used to looking down at this single inflexible piece of technology with glass and a chip that's probably as big as my pinky. But, let's get away from this and get back out to the world, which is spatial computing. So we feel that this technology is the first leap towards that spatial computing. And while the commercial market is down, the military market has a pain point for training for adversary air, and that's our initial vector that we're on.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you instantly can think of applications. If I've got a visor that I can see through, I can still see my environment, but also pull up a bio on someone I'm looking to talk to, or whatever it is. Sure. Facial recognition software is going to go, this is, Sheikh Ali, and you, right. Whatever. Like all that stuff is like,
think of the possibilities.
Yeah, it's right there. Like you guys are actually making an augmented reality world that you can do combat training with. It's incredible.
Yeah. From an investor standpoint, initially you might think that companies that are investing in, and we have some great investors behind us, but I think over the course of the last prior years, if you're going to invest in a military-oriented company, you're a little skittish. You're like, the economy, the budgets, and what kind of funding exists, and
we're pulling people out of these companies.
Right, and then also too, just the companies themselves. What level of risk they're willing to undertake. A Northrop or a Lockheed or a Boeing or an L3 or Collins or a Cubic might all say, well, boy, this is a really good idea, but is this risk versus the reward? And so a lot of times they weigh that and say, ooh, not now. So we're fortunate that we do have a good amount of funding, but we also have a different simultaneous approach. While there is a great military application, we were talking about this in the hangar. We don't have a need right now for augmented reality in the commercial market. I'm really not dying for the Google Glass or whatever Apple's coming out with, or an ear pod that projects images out. So that market's kind of flat right now, and we're concentrating on things that would be visor-oriented for the military, and eventually the curved holographic display would be for general aviation, like building Class B airspace and seeing things in the sky. Like, let's say I was teaching you guys to fly. You could go out in your first flight and you could see a wind-corrected landing pattern and look what this looks like, downwind, base, and final, rather than just having to thumb it. The safety applications, engine out. Eventually Uber Taxi will make its way into the system. So think of how you could I think the pilots and the vehicles will get solved, but one of the big challenges will be how do you navigate? So if you go to Google Maps and see your blue line from, as you guys, heading back down to San Diego today on the 405, okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So we have a IP and patents for highways in the sky where you could take off in that vehicle and now you fly that blue tube from, say, Palomar Airport to Santa Monica, and you just do that, and the guy's flying through. And as a guy who's got a lot of time on the 405, I relish that stuff coming faster sooner than later.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. How do you get a guy or a person to write $1 million check for your technology that's going to ask the question like, well, how do you know you're the only one doing this? I mean, how do you do market research for something like this? And even when you go to your website, it's like there's not a whole lot out there. Like you got to keep things quiet. So, I mean, where do you find yourselves, not only from the investment standpoint, Tom, but also how much you share?
That's absolutely the right question. And I'll say early on when we felt like we had cracked this, Glenn, it's really interesting. We had figured that, everybody's got their special divisions. Lockheed's got Skunk Works, Boeing's got Phantom Works, and everybody's got something. So not knowing what those companies had going was something we always kind of noodle over and wondered, hey, is somebody actually out there doing this? So the good news is that Glenn and Nick have been in the space for a long time. So they did a lot of competitive analysis and research because obviously, we're talking to investors. If I just saw this tech like you guys did and say, hey, this is awesome. Is anybody else doing this? And, we came back and said, no, we've got it. Well, how do you know? You don't really know. So we're somewhat comforted by the fact that when I was fortunate to meet the CEO of Lockheed Martin a couple of years ago, actually through a pseudo TK connection. Go figure. Again, TK at the Armed Forces Bowl in Fort Worth a couple of Christmases ago. And then it led me to meet the director of the Skunk Works. And we had been told by Northrop Grumman that this technology was on their 2035 roadmap. So that made us feel pretty good. Mm-hmm. And then when the CEO of Lockheed had heard that, she asked the director of the Skunk Works and said, well, how about us? And he's like, I'll have to get back to you on that. So we were fortunate as we've been going through this. We had a gentleman from the Skunk Works, the director of the Common Operating System, come out. And it was funny because Glenn had been actively listening to the Skunk Works podcast. So we've been listening to different things like your guys' show, which is awesome, by the way. And nice. It's great to like see all the things that are out there. So Glenn was on pins and needles really because when I told him the Skunk Works guy was coming, he was like, oh, great. So we're like, oh, great, and right. So he was sweating it, and he came out, he flew with us, and we had a good chat with him. And from what we understand, we're about 5-ish years away from what anybody seems to be doing because no one really took the approach we are. And that's goes back to the technology solution that the team had solved was we looked at it from a different perspective. And that was ultimately how we solved it. That's a very oversimplifying it, certainly. Yeah. But we do feel very confident that certainly other people will catch up at some point, but we feel like we're definitely leading it, and no one else is doing it in the outdoor dynamic environment. And as you guys saw today, it's one thing to give you a PowerPoint brief and say, oh, hey, great, this is what could be if you give us $10 million, Lockheed or Northrop or Boeing, or we'll make it for you. But
when we did that barrel roll, I had to go, oh, that's right. Because for the most part, you're not really in an airplane. Yeah, it's cramped and I'm too big for the canopy and all that stuff. Well, all of a sudden you throw this upside down and I'm like, oh, that's right, we're in an airplane.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to find the holographic image of the plane again.
Right,
I was trying to look at it like you would do in real life.
Absolutely.
Like, trying to get my eyes on this thing. So that's incredible. As a biz dev guy, you're looking ahead, trying to create partnerships and that kind of thing and trying to develop programs and everything. You guys need funding. You're doing, your round A, Series A?
Yes, we're involved in that,
now. If someone like Lockheed comes along and says, we're just going to buy you, does that take away the magic that you have in your nimbleness to react, but you also need money to get the thing done?
Right.
Like, where are you guys at with like your plan? Like, is it to sell and be part of a bigger thing? Is it to stay independent? Do you have a sense?
No, it's a great question, and we noodle that over that on the team. I think like many things, you write the big enough check, and you're like, hey, roger that. Have a nice day.
I remember we used to work at Red6.
Yeah. What happened to those guys? Boy, I haven't seen them for a while. I'm on my yacht in Tahiti, and I think ultimately that we're a good acquisition for somebody. I mean, we certainly could carry this technology through, but in all honesty, the keys of the kingdom come in 5th generation technology. Yeah. And there's so many interesting things coming out from, it's a longer discussion here, but people can look up programs like LVC, Live Virtual Constructive. Collins is working on TAX 2, which is a tactical combat training system, the 2nd version, which is how we data link the targets and we see what other planes are doing. We do briefs and debriefs with that system. It's been very old and it's been updated. Cubic is working on a slate pod for part of the technology that goes into this as well. So there's a lot of off-ramps, I guess is a good way to say. But when the day is done, I could definitely see this company being a good acquisition for somebody strong, that would use this technology to get into their platforms. But from Red 6, that would be fine if we maybe sold the military part up, but there's such an application for the commercial side that I'm really excited to see where this goes. Sure. To general aviation. I mean, when you think about it, the technology will be such that we're working to provide imagery on a curved holographic display. So what does that look like? Windshields for cars, windshields for general aviation airplanes, an Uber taxi.
What about medical applications? If you had a mapping system of the body, like we have maps in the cockpits, and now you're using this technology to see what isn't in place, and the doctors can use that to guide them to where the illness or the tumor or the I don't know. I mean, it's just sitting in the back of that plane today and seeing that wherever my head turned, I'm like actively physically training to do that. All those physical stressors on the body and having to react, but knowing that you don't have to fly another plane to do that. Right. You don't have to kill a human being on an operating table to do that.
Sure.
I mean, I think the applications, again, military is great. We're comfortable talking in that space.
Sure.
But the real pros are talking outside of that and saying, how do we use this for even... And that isn't even... Wait till Vegas gets a hold of this. Shit, man, there's your fucking moneymaker right there. They're going to find some perverse way to, the Red 6 Spearmint Rhino version or something. I don't know. I mean, it's limitless.
Well, they've got, Tupac's doing shows right now in holographic technology. It's really... you're exactly right, Scotty. I think, for both you guys, and I really appreciate you guys coming to fly with us and being on the show and talking about the technology. And I think the outreach of your audience, I'd be welcomed through you guys to hear some of the ideas, because everybody we've flown with has a different perspective or background, which has been great for us. And so by doing that, we have our own ideas, obviously, within the team of what we think is possible and what we are going to chase business-wise. But there's so many cool applications. I agree, military is a space we're all comfortable in, and they have a pain point right now, so it seems logical to go down that path. But the off-ramps of the commercial side and medical, I mean, think of brain surgeries and heart, very, very specific types of things. If you could have the, let's say, interns, go out and be really doing this, and as opposed to just kind of having virtual gloves and pretending you're in surgery and having something to that level, my gosh, it's how do you put a value on that?
Right.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of new and emerging technologies with that, where doctors are able to be on the battlefield, especially, and they're seeing what they're fixing, the broken leg, whatever. The doctor's 6,000 miles away. He's like, okay, yeah, clamp this. And he's talking through what he's seeing.
Yeah.
There. But with this technology, which is completely different, I think we could go on for hours talking about possibilities.
Yeah. That just jogged, a thought in my P head is that. So let's say you're trying to train a corpsman, battlefield corpsman going out there, and you could have him, let's say, go down to Camp Pendleton on one of the ranges with the infantry unit, and you could basically build a battlefield of wounded soldiers out there and how to prioritize and what to do. So he's literally, it's 100 degrees out in Camp Pendleton. He's got his pack on, he's got all of his gear, and he's hustling through, the different training ranges. And as far as he's concerned, he looks down and he's seeing, different things down there, arms and legs missing guys doing it. And it's just code. So, I tell Glenn, hey, just code it, which, seems like the thing to do.
It's like, I've only got 2 hours.
Gosh, it's going to take me at least an hour.
He does it in his sleep.
Oh, know. Yeah. But think about that. Think of how you could train a corpsman to do that on the battlefield. And, you could actually have, bullets coming at him as well. Yeah. I mean, you can build it as crazy as you want to be. So scenario-based training is just like at a whole nother level.
Yeah. It's critical for scenario-based training. There's sports applications for this, but for sure, there's nothing that's ever going to replace the physical force on the human body having to do that. I don't care how great you are at Call of Duty and you got the highest score on the internet. Hey, until you put a pack on and body armor and you're out of water and you're dehydrated and people are shooting back at you and you stub your toe and you feel that friction against your body. How do you respond to that? And then who's watching you from an evaluation standpoint on how well you perform all of those tasks so that when game day comes, you win?
Yeah.
I think that is
that's invaluable.
Invaluable. And what you're providing through this, and we talked probably for a good half hour with Dan about this, by providing this type of technology to any industry, whether it's a military or private industry, you are saving so many resources by giving the trainee the opportunity to fail.
Right.
And not have it cost $10,000 in gas to fill up a plane.
Oh, yeah.
Rent out a
Well, what does
stadium,
an F-22 cost?
I don't know, man. I pay
I'm not allowed to say I've got an idea, but somewhere between ridiculous and a lot.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we haven't touched on, and this has been my thesis, one of my ideas I'd like to follow up when we have some more time is, as a kid, I always wanted to play for the Chicago Bears. I'm a Chicago kid, and I grew up watching Walter Payton and, a lot of years of watching them lose and finally win and all that, and I'm still maintain a strong Bears fan, but it occurs to me that there's a level for sports that would be, really, really telling for this. So imagine, if you will, let's say, I'm the quarterback for the Bears, and, like Trubisky now is a new guy. So let's say you've got any rookie in the league coming out there. Well, so with our technology down the road here, you could 3D map and scale the players of all their different sizes and weights. So let's say I'm back there taking a snap, and I'm running out to, the right side, and I'm looking for receivers. I can literally build this entire game system, if you will, doing that. So think of how, I'm taking the snap. Now, if I were to be in the stands watching, I'm like, what is that guy doing? He's running like a crazy person. Like even today, if people were to see our airplane and they were at Camarillo over in the tower and they're watching us, and we're aileron rolling, we're tanking, we're flipping around, and we're chasing the bandits, like, what are those guys doing up there?
Yeah.
But to us, we're, doing real world operations. So think of a quarterback being able to watch, guys chasing him, rushing and blitzing and seeing that, and then able to have his coaches debrief that. And I made the joke with the Bears that, how do you get a guy, say, like Trubisky to be as good as Tom Brady? We're like, okay, great. 16 games a year, I don't know, 500 snaps a game times 20 seasons. You're like, well, could we go faster?
Yeah.
And this is a way to go faster. So maybe think also those critical positions, like maybe a middle linebacker who's looking at the offense and trying to scale that. He could have that system in his helmet on his visor, and he sees all the players out there. Think of how the coaching staff can now make him a better leader and better decision maker. And most of the NFL greats, the Peyton Mannings and the other guys out there, they're great visionaries on the field because they can look at a situation, they can look at a formation and quickly decide something.
I don't think there's anyone in a leadership position or any of us sitting in this room that don't subscribe to the 10,000 rule.
Yeah.
Getting those reps in is critical. And whether you've mastered that, and let's just use aviators, for example, since we're surrounded by them today, is not only getting the reps so it's not the first time you do it, but once you're certified, recertification and the savings on the military or any corporate or private sector enterprise that you're getting through this type of technology it's a fucking mind blower. The amount of money you can be saving by doing this thing in this type of environment is really, I can't wait to see what the Red 6 iPhone looks like in 12 years. I mean, I'm serious. That's a great analogy because
far off.
When you get 10 more Glenn cyborgs down there, it's going to be a scary world if you get all those guys in the room.
It really is. I mean, and it's really great to have you guys out here because, that in your listening audience, it comes through and says, hey, we get a lot of, hey, did you think about this? Or what about this? Or what about that?
For sure.
But to your point, we all know that military budgets, regardless of who's in office, they're ginormous figures. Right. So,
if the Skunk Works is 10 years behind, they can buy you and all of a sudden get 5 years ahead. Instantly.
Oh, no doubt. And then, the nice thing with being a small business company is that, we can go faster doing things than maybe big prime would be able to do. But, I think when the day is done, military budgets for training and readiness are always large, and we're always seem to be somewhat underfunded. So if we have a tool that, as Dan said earlier, we've got world-class engineers and technology out there. Why is it that the private sector and the government is so far apart in development? Well, as we know, it's difficult sometimes to get into the primes, and by the time you schedule a meeting, a follow-up, and a configuration management, and you talk about what's going to be, iPhone's already come out with another model by then. So it deters small companies sometimes to go to these large companies because they have to be self-funded, or it just becomes too onerous to go through the red tape. And so they're doing a better job with that. We can talk more offline about that. But I think when the day is done, to your guys' point, the money that we could be saving, let's use it for so many other things we have. The healthcare, the other issues that are upon us, the homeless situation. Here in, Venice where we're at, it's terrible. So I think anything we could do that would be a win for everybody. We decrease the military budget and put the planning money somewhere else. We get our war fighters of all services at the best world-class training there is, and basically build those reps. And we mitigate safety at the same time by being able to use these augmented things that feel as real as possible, while not necessarily banging into airplanes or tankers or the house-to-house fighting that you did, Scotty, back in the day. Wouldn't it be great if you could do a bunch of reps the first time before you ever pop down the door?
I mean, selfishly, I think about what if you set that a static range up with that type of with those type of pop-up targets as you're moving through the battlefield, but yet they're scored instead of just the dumb targets you have that don't move, that don't give you any feedback. I mean, it's from a door kicker's perspective, that is sexy.
Just think about when I talked about how you get in a firefight in certain parts of Iraq and the dust instantly gets kicked up from all the bullets going downrange, and all of a sudden you can't see. Just understanding that, or how many times are your traps just on fire in your neck?
Or you just trip and fall.
Yeah,
you lose line of sight. I mean, it's the little things that make everything hard. So
and that's where the disconnect, fellas, and you guys know this, from being operators, is that taking it from the sort of a boardroom to the battlefield, taking it from the lab to the field. That's where the disconnect sometimes comes in, and thankfully Red6, we're very fortunate because we've got a good mesh of both. But bringing you guys in, and that's why we're so keen on the military standpoint to get involved with all the different warfighters, because it's these factors that we want to build into the future of our system.
How do you make sure you don't get outcycled in this endeavor?
I think the thing is we're going fast, and we've got a lot of great support. And I think, like anything, once you get some good momentum and some good support behind you, I can tell you right now we've got the highest levels of the Air Force are supporting us. In fact, it's probably not a secret that General C.Q. Brown is about to become the new chief. And when we were out at WebTech, we spoke to him, and he's really behind our course of action of what direction we're going. So a company like ours that's small to be on the radar of the incoming chief of staff of the Air Force isn't a terrible thing. And that helps us to stay motivated but to stay hungry. And as you saw, the fact that our team is small and agile and can go fast, I wouldn't say I dare other companies to go as fast. We're fortunate we are able to go fast. And I think the speed at that we're moving and the trajectory that we're on with integrating from our Barracuda airplane into, as we talked about, a primary trainer airplane, and then into fourth generation aircraft and fifth generation aircraft. We told General Holmes, who is the Air Combat Commander, we can go as fast as you'll let us. And so far it looks like they're adopting that mindset and letting us. So I don't want to say it's ours to lose, but I think that we're definitely blazing the trail. And eventually this technology will become more mainstream, where it isn't right now in the commercial space. But it's coming. And you guys literally are of the few first people to ever fly and see this thing. Actually, you're the first Marine, bro.
Yeah.
We had the first Navy guy last week, and first, actually, I take that back. Let me think about this now. It's all been Air Force and contractors up to now. So we flew the first Navy guy, Jello Aiello, from the Fighter Podcast a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And Pete, you're the first Army guy, and Scott, you're the first Marine. So we got it covered. You guys are the first.
Get a Coastie up in there.
Yeah. I was going to say, we're just missing one now,
Sorry, Coast Guard. We always leave you out.
We could go on for another hour, man. Thanks for being on this episode.
Oh, it's great having you guys.
Yeah. Where do they need to find you online?
Oh, so you can go to, our website is www.red6ar.com.
The number 6.
Red with the number 6, ar.com. Another great place that I would go to is I'd go to LinkedIn can follow Daniel Robinson. You'll see him up there as the CEO of Red6, and then he's got an Instagram which kind of chronicles the story of what we're doing. And I think he just changed it to Red CEO.
That's right.
Red6 CEO. Is that right?
And that'll all be in the show notes.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get all that stuff. But essentially, I say his LinkedIn is actually the most colorful because there'll be pictures of you guys on there, and it's a nice little competitive tension for the other contractors. But yeah, keep following us.
Will do, brother. Semper Fi.
All right. Hoorah, brother. Thanks, man.